back to the PrinceCast. I'm Matt Butler, a senior writer with the opinion section, a member of the Princeton editorial board. With me I have Jacob Reeses, a columnist with the opinion section.
Pleasure to be here.
Great, thank you. And so I think today we'd like to talk about, first of all, the news stories that have been coming out this whole week, this series on frats and sororities and their role in Princeton's campus life. And then we'd like to also talk about the feminist pornographer who came this past Thursday and presented to us in the Let's event. And so I think the first thing, you recently wrote a column about the role of frats on campus. And I thought one interesting thing that you pointed out was that, well, the news stories have been focusing a lot on the negatives and sort of, the hazing and the bad actions that these frats take, that they actually do have sort of a positive role on campus that hasn't really been looked at. And I wonder if you could kind of elaborate on your opinion. What do you think is the the positive role of frats on campus?
Sure. Well, first I think it's really important to acknowledge that not all the fraternities conduct hazing. That's just ludicrous. And the recent article didn't really address that, and I thought that was unfortunate.
Right.
But in terms of the positive role that they can play, I was on the crew team for a part of my first semester, and that was really valuable because I saw the same group of guys every day, and there's some bonding that goes on there that you don't really get in other activities where you see people on a regular basis, but it's not daily. And I think that being in a fraternity or a sorority instills that same kind of bonding, and that's really valuable when you're a freshman and you come to this campus and you've got 5,000 people that you don't really know. So I think that can be really valuable to people, and I don't see a problem with it.
Now, how would you respond to Shirley Tillman's thoughts on the fact that, while it is true that, for instance, Triangle or even the crew team that you mentioned, will have sort of, they'll have a heterogeneous mix of people, that oftentimes frats can be very homogenous. So it isn't so much that you're making a lot of friends, so much as just finding people a lot like you that you hang out with. Well, that leads to not as edifying experience when you're at Princeton.
I think that's a bit of an unfair criticism because most groups, they do organize based on some main principle. If you're in Triangle, you obviously have some common interest. If you're in College Republicans or College Democrats, there's some common political interest. If you're on the crew team, then you all want to row or shout at rowers if you're a coxswain. So the thing with the frats and sororities is you're organizing based on some social preferences, and I guess some people have a problem with that. But in real life, people do associate with each other on the basis of some shared social preferences, and I don't see a problem with the fact that these are groups that organize outright on that principle. The eating clubs too, the baker clubs, is the same kind of thing, and I guess people want to criticize the fraternities and sororities in part because they're part of that culture of social selectivity and self-selectivity, but that's real life, and I don't know why it's so offensive.
Now, in terms of, I guess no one would deny the fact that, that I guess SAE is cited so often, but that, the fraternities that do haze, and particularly the haze in a very harsh manner, what do you think are probably the best routes of trying to, prevent that or to stymie that type of, activity?
Well, before I answer that question, I do want to address one other thing. One thing that's really unfortunate about this subject is it's very difficult for the people who are being reported on to defend themselves. So we haven't really seen the other side of what was going on with SAE. We haven't heard from John Burford's pledge class.
Right.
So we don't know if he was exaggerating or not. Not that I'm saying he is, it's just that we don't know. But getting back to your question, what should we do? That's what you asked.
I wonder if you had, any suggestions, about maybe a way of trying to, curb it. So, for instance, I know the editorial board has proposed the fact that we should try to talk to sort of, the parent organizations, the overall chapters, the chapter heads of all of these organizations, and in that way, because so many of them actually promote the idea of limiting the amount of hazing and actually trying to build sort of fine young gentlemen or fine young ladies and sororities, that they actually want to move away from ideas of hazing, and so
I think it's a really valuable suggestion that the national organizations come in and push the local chapters to really follow the rules.
Yeah.
But I think that recognition would also help. I didn't get into that in my column, really, although I sort of implied it. But if the university gives something to the fraternities and sororities, I guess the sororities would benefit the most because they've said outright that they want to use the university facilities to do some some totally legitimate charity events and things like that. So if the university is giving the Greek organizations something, that's something they can take away. If they recognize the fraternities, then if some tragedy does occur, God forbid, then they can look at the specific fraternities and they can maybe force them to disband. Because let's think about what Shirley Tillman said. She said, well, right now I think that we can accept that the fraternities and sororities exist because freedom of association. We can't force people not to do this. But
right.
The thing that would override that argument is if it's a danger to campus. So that makes me kind of scared. If something happens, are they going to just completely outlaw the fraternities and sororities as they've done in the past? I don't think that would be fair to the fraternities and sororities that don't haze at all or have minimal hazing that isn't dangerous. I think that if you did recognize them, then you could punish them in a way that would be fairer and probably more effective too.
Okay, I think it's an interesting suggestion. I definitely think that the conversation I think this week has really gotten started up in earnest again. So I hope that hopefully we can move away from hazing sort of as in general.